Klarna.
It's burritos.
Burritos on layaway.
They're actually giving you the ability to pay for your burrito in installments.
DoorDash and the buy now, pay later company, Klarna,
Affirm,
Sezzle,
and Afterpay, partnering up to allow you to break up your payments.
They're eating now and paying later.
Why would someone finance a lunch?
I guess it does make sense. Like, people have to eat.
And it's not just lunch.
It's like I literally once financed a bottle of body wash.
Dresses, things like that. Plane tickets, I've done through that as well. Yeah.
People are changing the way they purchase everything.
I'm using Klarna.
And if it's Afterpay, I'm gonna pick it every time.
Lit that shit up.
But that change is coming with regret.
We're going towards poverty.
Buy now, pay later is just another way of getting into trouble.
American household debt is at an all-time high of $18 trillion.
This isn't the first time we've seen this kind of shift in America.
What does credit mean to you?
Gosh, I don't know. Buy now and pay later, I guess.
It's just the latest chapter in a long history of being conditioned to consume.
And where are the commercials that say, don't use credit cards? If you use a credit card, pay it off in 30 days.
So how do we get here? Why aren't Americans afraid to have debt? How did these apps convince us to buy things we don't even need? And why do we love to borrow money? Take a look at this graph. This is the total consumer debt of America by its type. Mortgage, car loan, student loan, credit card loan, and other types of debt all sum up to $17 trillion. There is, however, another category that rarely appears in these tallies. Economists call it phantom debt.
Phantom debt.
Phantom debt.
It's called phantom because, number one, it's not reported. And number two, economists and other financial experts can't really get a handle on how much of that debt is actually out there.
Over the last few years, America saw a shift in the way people purchase stuff. People are now addicted to pay in installment schemes. Buy now, pay later companies like Klarna, Affirm, Afterpay, and many others allow consumers to buy everyday items and pay the complete price afterward. However, unlike credit cards, these companies generally don't report information to the major credit bureaus, which means these loans typically aren't reflected in people's credit scores. So whatever debt they take goes invisible, and people love this.
It's just easy. You pay it and then you can split in 4 different payments?
Yeah. According to surveys, 53% of BNPL users trust BNPL over credit cards. But this preference change isn't something new. It's similar to how people move to credit cards from layaway programs. Layaway schemes started during the Great Depression in the 1930s when most families were suffering financially. So to help consumers buy things they can't afford, retailers ask consumers to make a down payment on an item. The store would then hold that item for them while they pay the remainder of the price in installment. Once they fully paid for it, they can then take the item with them. And it's just one example. Since then, there have been so many events that shaped how we consume today. We'll be discussing those shifts over the decades in just a few minutes. But before that, I wanted to understand, what is there about these apps that make it so useful for the consumers? So I watched a bunch of TikToks and I found an example where paying in installments is even better than a credit card. Let's say you've been invited to a party, but don't own a suitable outfit. So you start browsing online. 4 dresses catch your eye, yet you'd prefer to try them all on before deciding. The usual options are pay for every dress up front, then wait for refunds on the ones you return, or charge the purchases to your credit card. Either way, you risk stretching your monthly budget. And if you can't clear the credit card balance in time, you'll face steep interest charges. But with the BNPL plan, you spread the cost over a few interest-free installments. And because your refund on any returns typically lands before the next payment is due, covering those installments is hassle-free. So this doesn't sound like a problem, right?
I'm scared where we're gonna end up. We're going towards poverty.
When Mona first used Buy Now, Pay Later, she admits it was for things she wanted. Afterpay, ZipPay, Hum. She's got several accounts.
Studies show that Buy Now, Pay Later encourage consumers to buy items that they could otherwise not afford. And because these companies don't have credit history, people end up stacking loans from multiple BNPL apps. Americans have a relationship with debt that's unlike anywhere else in the world. Take China, for example. They only spend less than a third of what we do in any given year, even though they have almost 5 times as many people in their country. So the question is, how do we get here? How do we get so good at buying what we don't need? And when did debt stop being scary and start feeling normal? World War II didn't just reshape borders, it fundamentally changed how entire nations think about money. Germany, for example, was devastated and defeated, so they developed a strong saving culture and cautious consumption. Similarly, Japan cut back on personal spending and focused on necessities. Across Europe and Asia, hardship created a generation that hoarded resources and feared debt. But America's story was completely different. At the end of World War II, American soldiers returned home to a country quite different from the ones they had left 4 years earlier. Wartime production had helped pull America's economy out of depression. During World War, Americans were asked not to buy, at least not for themselves. Consuming less and saving more was framed as a way to support the troops. Americans had gone years with limited availability of appliances, cars, and other luxuries. But after the war, jobs were plentiful, wages were higher, and because of the lack of consumer goods during the war, they had money saved in their accounts ready to spend. At war's end, the items people most desired included televisions, cars, washing machines, refrigerators, toasters, and vacuum cleaners, the machines that would help them modernize their lives. But something happened in the 50s and 60s that was the beginning of the consumer era we're living in today. They started keeping up with the Jonases. In the post-war 1950s and 60s, status competition took the form of keeping up with the Jonases. People started comparing themselves to their neighbors and tried to one-up them. If the Jonases next door got a new Chevrolet or installed an air conditioner, the Smiths down the street felt the pressure to follow suit. However, this competitive consumption saw a dynamic shift when the new consumerism era arrived. During the 80s, Americans were no longer satisfied with the matching neighbor sedan or patio set. They stopped looking sideways at the Jonases, but started looking upwards at celebrities, CEOs, and billionaire entrepreneurs.
5 and 6,000 square foot McMansions are going up in subdivisions with pools and tennis courts all over the country, as Americans play a new game. No longer keeping up with the Joneses, now it's the Gateses.
Over time, these comparisons shifted from celebrities on screen to influencers online. This upscale emulation dramatically raised the bar for what is considered a good life, and it set off a never-ending race that most can barely afford to run. But this couldn't happen without one key element: media. After World War II, media played a big role in shaping what the consumers wanted to consume. Sitcoms and other TV shows in particular became a mirror of an exaggerated, affluent version of American life. Friends is a good example of that. A group of young people in Manhattan enjoying a huge, stylish apartment, a living arrangement you just can't afford unless you have a very high income. Viewers laughed at the jokes, but also subtly absorbed those lifestyle expectations. But it's not just the shows themselves. Advertisements push the same message. This media-saturated environment gave rise to what scholars call symbolic consumption. Brand names and logos became central to identity. A generation or two ago, most products were generic or unbranded. People drank water from the tap and coffee from a plain cup without any prestige attached. But that started to change over time. A simple coffee has turned into a Starbucks cup, a statement about taste and buying power. Consuming in this context isn't just about having things. It's about what those things mean to us and to others. But wanting that lifestyle didn't mean that people could actually afford it. Something else had to bridge the gap between desire and purchase. Something that gave the illusion that we could have whatever we wanted.
We prefer Visa traveler's checks.
Visa is known around the world, and if our traveler's checks are lost, Visa has a worldwide refund system.
Now you can choose the way you want to pay with Visa.
But that something didn't just open the door to spending.
Bill had maybe $60, $70 of fees, and every month it was the same thing.
It locked a lot of us into a cycle we're still trying to escape.
Credit card debt is exploding in this country.
About 1/3 of Americans will go into debt for their holiday shopping.
American household debt is at an all-time high of $18 trillion.
Unlike many other nations, the US economy depends heavily on consumer spending. So in a crisis, it becomes vital for people to keep buying to sustain growth. If that doesn't happen, the country will start to collapse. For that reason, the government leaders often encourage the public to keep opening their wallets. For example, after 9/11, President Bush urged Americans to go shopping and even suggested family trips to Disney World so life could continue as usual. But this wasn't the first time. After World War II, government feared the country would return to recession. They needed to keep the factories busy and maintain high employment, so they introduced the GI Bill in 1944. The government guaranteed low down payment and low interest home loans for returning veterans. Agencies promoted mortgages as a smart investment in family stability and community growth. As a part of it, student loans were also promoted as they expanded access to white-collar jobs, underpinning the booming post-war U.S. economy.
If they can't find you a job right away, you'll be given $20 a week, up to a limit of 52 weeks.
But what they also did was tied consumers in a 30-year-old debt.
Mr. Money, my father's been making payments on our home for years.
That's called mortgage credit. And sometimes the payments may run for as long as 25 years.
This debt was called the good debt. They were seen as investments for a better lifestyle. This gave rise to credit cards in 1958, but it wasn't until the 60s and 70s that plastic money truly caught on. By 1969, the economy began to revolve around credit scores. The more responsibly a person could borrow, the higher the score, and the simpler it became to obtain future loans. Keeping a good credit score became a necessity. No score can bar you from renting an apartment, getting car insurance, or even landing certain jobs. During the 2000s, Americans were going deeper and deeper into debt to finance their buying bid. The stigma once attached to owing money faded away. Borrowing became a normal part of funding a lifestyle. New furniture, the latest electronics, vacations. If paychecks couldn't cover them, credit often did.
My credit card debt is probably about $3,000.
$15,000 to $18,000, I bet.
Probably about $1,500.
If you ask American consumers how much credit card debt they're holding, the average answer is less than half of their real debt.
But carrying a debt today is quite different than it was in the 70s. A recent survey found that 59% of Americans could not cover a $1,000 emergency expense out of savings, meaning most must turn to credit cards or loans when crisis hit. Americans today are more financially exposed than ever. The pressures of rising housing costs, inflated car prices, growing student loans, and soaring credit card interest rates. Debt now eats up roughly 82% of the average household's disposable income. What's left gets drained by the subscription model, where even printer ink requires a recurring fee, so consumers end up owning almost nothing in the end. This financial strain fuels frustration and drives impulsive spending as people try to regain a sense of control or comfort. And with the bi-weekly paycheck cycle, that feeling only got stronger. Every deposit hit like a reset button, like you'd always have time to catch up. It's precisely this vulnerability that buy now, pay later platforms are designed to exploit. So I came to realize that we don't actually love to borrow money. Rather, we've been conditioned over the decades to consume beyond what we can afford. But is there a way to save ourselves? Buy now, pay later schemes has been there for a century, but every shift in consumer behavior happens because a layer of friction is removed for them to spend money. Credit cards replaced layaways because they made it relatively easy for consumers to purchase items they couldn't actually afford, reducing the friction in spending. Similarly, Gen Z tends to perceive BNPL apps as a safer alternative to credit cards, partly because they eliminate friction in the purchasing process. No credit history is checked, no high interest rates, and easy installment options for them to purchase things right away. But that's not the entire truth. BNPL apps often charge high fees if someone fails to make an installment. This can lead to overextension as well, meaning they have more debt than they can handle, as consumers could borrow from multiple lenders at once since there's no credit history. But there's a simple way to avoid falling into this trap: payment automation. By automating your finances, assigning every dollar a job, and scheduling payments to align with your paycheck, you remove the need for willpower, perfect memory, or constant self-discipline. Your financial decisions become intentional, not impulsive. We've covered the best practices for managing your personal income in more detail in our video. Check it out to take control of your money before it starts controlling you. But before that, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel for more such content.